Port Moresby, New Guinea, December 27, 1942, 0900 hours, and Lieutenant Richard Bong rolled his P-38F Lightning into a steep turn at 12,000 feet, watching 12 Japanese fighters and dive bombers climbing toward him from their base at Leh. The morning sun glinted off the twin booms of his aircraft as he pushed the throttles forward, feeling the twin Allison engines surge with power. His wingman, Lieutenant Kenneth Sparks, held formation off his right side, both pilots scanning the sky for the optimal moment to attack. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Then something happened that would transform everything. American fighter pilots thought they knew about defensive maneuvering. As Bong closed with the lead 0, the Japanese pilot executed a hard reversal turn, forcing Bong to overshoot. Instead of attempting to climb away using vertical energy tactics as doctrine dictated, Bong did something unprecedented. He reversed direction sharply, rolled 90 degrees, and pulled hard back toward the 0, then reversed again before the Japanese pilot could complete his own turn. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The resulting flight paths created a pattern that looked exactly like the blades of scissors opening and closing, both aircraft crossing paths repeatedly as each pilot fought to slow his forward momentum enough to slide behind his opponent. And in that moment, as Bong executed the third reversal and watched the 0 pilot struggle to match his timing, he discovered that the P-38 Lightning, this massive 10-ton twin-engine fighter that everyone assumed was helpless in turning combat, possessed a hidden capability that would revolutionize aerial warfare in the Pacific. The scissors maneuver, executed properly in a Lightning with combat flaps deployed, could defeat even the legendary 0's turning advantage by transforming dogfighting from a contest of radius into a battle of timing, energy management, and nerve. The mission had begun with supreme confidence. Captain Thomas Lynch led 12 P-38 seconds off the runway at Laloki Aerodrome on strip alert, climbing rapidly to intercept a large Japanese formation headed toward Port Moresby. The intelligence reports indicated 25 enemy aircraft, a mix of fighters and dive bombers from the Tainan Kokutai, veterans who had dominated the skies over the Philippines and East Indies since December 1941. These Japanese pilots had learned to exploit the 0's extraordinary maneuverability against every American fighter they encountered, turning inside Wildcats and Warhawks with contemptuous ease, forcing American pilots into vertical energy tactics that traded close-in combat for slashing hit-and-run attacks. But the P-38 Lightning changed everything, though few American pilots yet understood how. The twin-engine configuration that German and Japanese intelligence analysts had dismissed as a fatal liability in dogfighting actually enabled tactical innovations impossible in single-engine fighters. And the scissors maneuver, which had existed as a defensive technique since World War I, found its perfect platform in the Lightning's unique combination of characteristics: the forgiving stall behavior, the counter-rotating propellers that eliminated torque effects, and most critically, the Fowler flaps that could transform the aircraft's turning performance at the pilot's command. At 5th Air Force Headquarters in Brisbane, Lieutenant General George Kenney had been wrestling with a fundamental tactical problem since assuming command in July 1942. His fighter units were equipped with 3 aircraft types, none optimized for the Pacific Theater's unique demands. The P-39, Era Cobra, despite its innovative design, suffered from poor, high-altitude performance and limited range. The P-40 Warhawk, reliable and rugged, couldn't match the 0's climb rate or maneuverability, and the handful of P-38 Lightnings that had arrived in Australia during mid-1942 came with their own problems: mechanical issues with the turbo superchargers, pilots intimidated by the twin-engine configuration, and tactical doctrine that treated them as high-altitude interceptors unsuitable for the swirling low-level dogfights that characterized combat over New Guinea. The conventional wisdom, established through bitter experience in Europe and reinforced by American pilots' encounters with 0's during the first year of war, held that twin-engine fighters could not dogfight effectively. The German Messerschmitt Bf 110 Zerstörer had been slaughtered over Britain in 1940. The Japanese Navy's own twin-engine fighters, the Nakajima J-1N Gecko, avoided close combat entirely. Therefore, when American pilots transitioned to the P-38, their instructors taught them to exploit the Lightning's advantages in speed, climb rate, and diving performance, while avoiding prolonged turning engagements at all costs. But several pilots in the 39th Fighter Squadron, which had traded its Airacobras for Lightnings at Amberley in Queensland before deploying to Port Moresby, had begun experimenting with tactics that contradicted this doctrine. They discovered that the P-38, when flown at specific speeds with combat flaps deployed, could sustain turning combat far longer than anyone expected. The key was understanding energy management not just in the vertical plane, where the Lightning's power advantage was obvious, but in the horizontal plane as well, where the scissors maneuver transformed close-range combat from a death sentence into a competitive fight. The scissors maneuver itself was not new. British and German pilots in World War I had developed the basic technique. When an enemy fighter achieved a position on your tail, you initiated a series of reversing turns, each one designed to slow your forward progress and force the attacker to overshoot. The maneuver worked because of a fundamental principle in aerial combat. The attacking pilot needs forward velocity to close the distance and achieve a firing solution, but that same velocity becomes a liability when the defender suddenly reverses direction. The attacker must either overshoot, passing in front of the defender and reversing their positions, or slow down to match the defender's flight path, which creates opportunities for the defender to gain angles and reverse the engagement. During the Battle of Britain in 1940, Royal Air Force Hurricane and Spitfire pilots had used the scissors defensively against German fighters with mixed results. The maneuver required precise timing, excellent spatial awareness, and most critically, an aircraft that could maintain control authority at low speeds while executing rapid reversal turns. Many pilots attempting the scissors found themselves stalling out during the reversals, presenting an easy target. Others discovered that their aircraft's roll rate, the speed at which it could bank from one direction to the other, determined whether they could complete the reversal before the attacker lined up a shot. The P-38 Lightning should have been terrible at the scissors maneuver. At over 10 tons fully loaded, it weighed nearly twice as much as a Zero. Its initial roll rate in early variants was notoriously slow, taking nearly 2 seconds to achieve 90 degrees of bank. The twin booms created massive moments of inertia that should have made rapid direction changes impossible. Every pilot who looked at the Lightning's specifications assumed it would be helpless in the scissors, forced to fight in the vertical plane, or not at all. They were wrong. And the reason they were wrong revealed something profound about aircraft design and tactical innovation. From the P-38F-15 model onwards, Lockheed had incorporated a combat maneuver setting into the Lightning's Fowler flap system. When deployed at 8 degrees, these flaps increased the wing area by 25% and generated 35% more lift. This wasn't just an incremental improvement, it fundamentally altered the aircraft's flight characteristics. The increased lift meant the P-38 could maintain a tighter turning radius at a given speed. The drag increase was manageable, far less than the 35% lift gain, and most importantly, the flaps could be deployed at speeds up to 250 miles per hour, meaning pilots could enter the scissors with significant energy and then deploy the flaps mid-maneuver to tighten their turns. But the combat flaps alone didn't make the P-38 excel at the scissors. The aircraft's other design features worked synergistically to create a platform uniquely suited to this demanding maneuver. The counter-rotating propellers eliminated the torque and P-factor effects that plagued single-engine fighters at low speeds. A pilot in a Zero or P-40 executing a scissors maneuver had to constantly compensate for propeller torque, which wanted to roll the aircraft in one direction and made coordinated flight near the stall regime difficult. The P-38 pilot experienced none of this. The aircraft flew coordinately at all speeds, allowing complete focus on energy management and position awareness. The twin-boom configuration, initially criticized as creating excessive drag, actually provided exceptional stability in the scissors. The widely separated tail surfaces gave the P-38 powerful directional stability, preventing the yaw oscillations that often developed during rapid reversal turns. And the tricycle landing gear, which had seemed like unnecessary complexity, gave pilots excellent visibility during approach and landing, building confidence in the aircraft's low speed. Handling that translated directly to combat effectiveness in the Scissors. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Lynch, who had scored victories in P-39 seconds before transitioning to the Lightning, understood these advantages intuitively. He had spent weeks at Amberley teaching his squadron pilots how to exploit the P-38's unique characteristics, emphasizing that the Lightning fought differently than any other American fighter. Not better or worse in absolute terms, but different, requiring pilots to abandon preconceptions and learn the aircraft's specific strengths. The Scissors maneuver became central to Lynch's tactical instruction. He taught his pilots to recognize the specific conditions when the Scissors would work. When a Zero achieved a stern position at close range, when altitude was insufficient for a vertical escape, when energy state made a pure turning fight suicidal. In these situations, the Scissors transformed a losing position into a neutral one, buying time for a wingman to intervene or creating an opportunity to reverse the engagement entirely. The technique required mastery of the P-38's combat flaps. Deploy them too early, and the drag penalty would rob you of the energy needed to sustain multiple reversals. Deploy them too late, and your initial turn radius would be too large, allowing the attacker to track inside your flight path. The optimal technique was to begin the first reversal clean flaps retracted, using the P-38's inherent turning ability, then deploy combat flaps at 8 degrees during the second or third reversal, when airspeed had bled down to 250 miles per hour or below. The reversal itself demanded precise pilot technique. Roll 90 degrees toward the attacker, using the ailerons and rudder together to avoid slipping or skidding. Pull back on the control yoke to tighten the turn, loading the aircraft to 3 or 4 Gs, watching the airspeed indicator to ensure you didn't bleed too much energy. As the attacker crossed your flight path, immediately reverse the roll 180 degrees, unloading the G-forces momentarily to preserve airspeed, then pulling hard again in the opposite direction, all while maintaining visual contact with the attacker, because in the Scissors, losing sight of your opponent for even 2 seconds meant defeat. Japanese pilots encountering this tactic for the first time experienced complete disorientation. They had spent months, in some cases years, perfecting the art of turning combat. Their training at the Tsuchiura Naval Air Station emphasized horizontal maneuvering, exploiting the Zero's 241 square foot wing area to achieve turning radii that American fighters couldn't match. The standard engagement sequence was predictable. American fighter attempts to dogfight, Zero turns inside, American fighter tries to dive away, Zero pilot leads the deflection and opens fire. But when P-38 pilots executed the Scissors properly, that sequence broke down. The first reversal caught Zero pilots by surprise. Twin-engine fighters weren't supposed to reverse direction that aggressively. The second reversal, executed with combat flaps deployed, achieved a turning radius that seemed impossible for a 10-ton aircraft. And the third reversal, if the engagement lasted that long, often resulted in the Zero overshooting as its pilot, accustomed to American fighters running away, suddenly found the P-38, reversing directly toward him with guns aligned. Back over Port Moresby that December morning, Lieutenant Bong demonstrated this technique with devastating effectiveness. His first engagement began at 12,000 feet, when he closed on a Mitsubishi A6M20 that had separated from the main formation. The Japanese pilot, seeing the P-38 approaching, executed a hard left turn, confident that the heavy American fighter would be forced to pursue in a wide, predictable arc. Instead, Bong deployed his combat flaps at 8 degrees and turned inside the Zero's radius, achieving a 45-degree deflection shot that sent 20mm cannon rounds through the Zero's engine. His second victory came minutes later when another Zero achieved a 6 o'clock position at close range, while Bong was pursuing a Japanese dive bomber. Instead of attempting to outclimb the Zero using vertical tactics, Bong immediately initiated a Scissors maneuver. The first reversal forced the Zero pilot to adjust his aim, The second reversal, executed with combat flaps deployed and the P-38 at 220 miles per hour, brought Bong's flight path directly across the Zero's nose. The third reversal completed the position reversal. Bong was now behind the Zero, the Japanese pilot desperately trying to escape in a dive, and the Lightning's superior diving speed allowed Bong to close to point-blank range before firing. Lieutenant Kenneth Sparks, flying as Bong's wingman, claimed 2 victories using similar tactics. The engagement lasted 17 minutes, long enough for the P-38 pilots to completely exploit their aircraft's capabilities. When it ended, American pilots claimed 15 Japanese aircraft destroyed 9 fighters and 2 dive bombers, confirmed by official records, though Japanese records indicate somewhat lower losses. Regardless of the exact numbers, the December 27 engagement marked a turning point in Pacific aerial warfare. Within days, word spread through 5th Air Force squadrons about the new tactics. Pilots who had been avoiding close-in combat with Zeros suddenly had a technique that gave them competitive odds. The scissors maneuver, combined with the P-38's combat flaps, transformed the Lightning from a boom and zoom energy fighter into something far more versatile, an aircraft that could choose when and how to fight, adapting its tactics to the specific situation. At his headquarters, General Kenny immediately recognized the significance. He ordered all P-38 squadrons to receive specialized instruction in scissors tactics, bringing in experienced pilots like Bong and Lynch to demonstrate the technique. The training emphasized several critical points. The scissors was not a miracle maneuver that guaranteed victory. It was a defensive technique that bought time and created opportunities. Success required excellent energy management. Enter the scissors with too little speed, and you'd stall out during the first reversal. Too much speed, and you couldn't turn tightly enough to force the overshoot. Timing was everything. Each reversal had to be executed at precisely the moment when the attacker committed to a firing solution, not before and not after. The combat reports flowing into Kenny's intelligence section during January and February 1943 documented the scissors maneuver's effectiveness with statistical precision. P-38 squadrons employing scissors tactics achieved significantly better survival rates in close combat compared to units that relied solely on boom and zoom attacks. The 39th Fighter Squadron, which had pioneered the technique, maintained an impressive kill-to-loss ratio despite being outnumbered in most engagements. And critically, P-38 pilots, who survived an initial encounter where they used the scissors, reported increased confidence in their aircraft's capabilities, which translated to more aggressive tactics and better combat effectiveness. But the scissors maneuver's greatest impact wasn't statistical, it was psychological. Japanese pilots who had dominated Pacific skies for over a year suddenly faced an opponent that could challenge them in their own domain. The Zero remained superior in pure turning radius below 200 miles per hour. Japanese pilots retained their exceptional training and combat experience, but the P-38's ability to execute the scissors effectively meant that achieving a 6 o'clock position on a Lightning no longer guaranteed a kill. American pilots had a competitive option, a technique that could reverse a losing position if executed with skill and timing. At the Tainan Kokutai's base at Leh, Japanese pilots began reporting encounters with American twin-engine fighters that behaved unlike anything they had faced before. Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai, already one of Japan's leading aces with 38 victories, engaged P-38 seconds over Buna in January 1943, and later wrote that the American pilots had developed new tactics that exploited their aircraft's unusual capabilities. He described watching a Lightning execute what he called reversing spirals that forced a pursuing Zero to overshoot, then seeing the American pilot immediately transition to an offensive position using a climb that no single-engine fighter could match. The tactical revolution that the scissors maneuver represented spread rapidly through American fighter squadrons in the Southwest Pacific during early 1943. But understanding why the P-38 excelled at this demanding maneuver required examining the specific engineering decisions Lockheed had made during the aircraft's development, decisions that seemed unrelated to dogfighting but proved critical when pilots began pushing the Lightning to its limits in close combat. At Lockheed's Burbank facility in California, Chief Engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson had designed the P-38 around a fundamental principle that contradicted conventional fighter design philosophy. Where other manufacturers sought to minimize weight and maximize agility through lightweight construction, Johnson embraced structural strength and redundancy. The twin-boom configuration distributed structural loads across multiple load paths. The engines, mounted in streamlined nacelles on the wings, were positioned to minimize asymmetric thrust problems if one failed, and the control surfaces, mounted on twin tail booms rather than a single vertical stabilizer, provided exceptional control authority at all speeds. These design decisions meant the P-38 could withstand maneuvers that would have overstressed a conventional fighter. During scissors combat, when pilots loaded the aircraft to 4 or 5 Gs during each reversal turn, then immediately unloaded and reversed to the opposite direction, the airframe experienced rapid stress reversals that could fatigue metal structures. The Lightning's robust construction handled these loads without complaint, allowing pilots to execute multiple scissors sequences during a single engagement without worrying about structural failure. The combat flaps, central to the P-38's scissors capability, represented another engineering innovation that had taken years to perfect. Ward Beeman, Lockheed's aerodynamics engineer, had adapted Harlan Fowler's 1924 flap design specifically for the P-38, creating a system where the flaps first extended backward on aluminum tracks before rotating downward. This two-stage deployment increased wing area by 25%, while creating a slot between the flap and wing that energized the boundary layer, preventing the airflow separation that normally occurred with extreme flap deflection. The mechanical complexity was substantial. Each wing incorporated precision-machined aluminum tracks running on sealed roller bearings, hydraulic actuators powered by 1,000 pounds per square inch of pressure, and synchronization mechanisms, ensuring both flaps deployed symmetrically. Lockheed's manufacturing tolerances were extraordinary. The tracks were machined to 30,000ths of an inch precision, the bearings sealed against moisture and dirt infiltration, the hydraulic lines protected by redundant safety systems. Japanese intelligence officers who examined captured P-38 components were astounded by the manufacturing quality. At the Yokosuka Naval Air Technical Arsenal, Chief Technical Officer Captain Minoru Honda conducted detailed analysis of a P-38G's flap mechanism recovered from a crash site near Leh. His report to Imperial Navy Headquarters concluded that reproducing the Fowler flap system would require machine tools Japan didn't possess, aluminum alloys they couldn't produce in quantity, and quality control standards their factories couldn't maintain under wartime conditions. The entire system added only 170 pounds to the P-38's empty weight, while providing the equivalent performance of adding 60 square feet of wing area when deployed. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. This engineering sophistication translated directly to tactical effectiveness in the scissors maneuver. When a P-38 pilot deployed combat flaps at 8 degrees while traveling at 250 miles per hour, the flaps extended smoothly over approximately 2 seconds. The aerodynamic changes were dramatic lift coefficient increased from 1.4 to 1.89, a 35% improvement. The drag increase was proportional but manageable, and most critically, the flaps transformed the P-38's turning performance precisely when pilots needed it most, during the middle phases of a scissors engagement when energy had bled down to the regime where the maneuver succeeded or failed. Lieutenant Colonel Gerald Johnson, commanding the 49th Fighter Group's transition to P-38 seconds in early 1943, developed a comprehensive training program teaching pilots how to exploit the combat flaps during scissors maneuvers. His instruction emphasized understanding the aircraft's energy state at every moment. Enter the scissors at 300 miles per hour, and your first reversal would be too wide, allowing the attacker to cut inside. Enter at 150 miles per hour, and you lacked the energy to sustain multiple reversals, making the maneuver a desperation move that rarely succeeded. The optimal entry speed was 220 to 250 miles per hour, fast enough to execute several reversals, but slow enough that combat flaps would be effective during the second or third reversal. Johnson taught his pilots to monitor their airspeed indicator constantly during scissors combat, watching for the moment when speed bled down to 250 miles per hour, then deploying combat flaps while simultaneously executing a reversal turn. This coordination required significant practice. Deploy the flaps while rolled 90 degrees and pulling Gs, and the aircraft's behavior changed mid-maneuver, requiring immediate control input adjustments. The counter-rotating propellers proved equally critical to scissors' effectiveness. On conventional single-engine fighters, propeller torque created a rolling moment that varied with power setting and airspeed. At low speeds, with high power, exactly the conditions during scissors combat, this torque effect was strongest. Pilots had to apply opposite aileron and rudder to maintain coordinated flight, which complicated the already demanding task of executing precise reversal turns while tracking an opponent's position. The P-38 eliminated this problem entirely. The left engine's propeller rotated counterclockwise when viewed from the cockpit. The right engine's propeller rotated clockwise. The torque effects cancelled out completely, leaving the aircraft perfectly balanced in roll at all power settings and airspeeds. This seemingly minor detail transformed scissors combat effectiveness because pilots could focus entirely on timing and position rather than fighting the aircraft's natural tendencies. First Lieutenant Thomas Maguire, flying with the 431st Fighter Squadron of the newly formed 475th Fighter Group, became one of the most proficient practitioners of P-38 scissors tactics. Maguire had transitioned to Lightnings in February 1943 after flying P-39 seconds in the Aleutians, and he approached mastering the aircraft with methodical determination. During training flights from the 475th base at Dobodura, he practiced scissors maneuvers for hours, developing an intuitive understanding of the precise control inputs required at each phase of the maneuver. Maguire's technique emphasized aggressive energy management. Unlike pilots who entered the scissors defensively, trying to survive until a wingman could intervene, Maguire used the scissors offensively, deliberately baiting Japanese pilots into pursuing him at close range, then executing reversals that not only forced an overshoot, but positioned him for an immediate counterattack. His combat reports described engagements where he completed 3 or 4 scissors sequences, each reversal executed with split-second timing, ultimately maneuvering behind Zeros and destroying them with concentrated nose-mounted firepower. The concentrated armament, 450 caliber machine guns, and one 20mm cannon, all mounted in the P-38's nose, gave the Lightning a decisive advantage during scissors combat. On wing-mounted gun installations, bullets followed convergent paths that intersected at a specific distance, typically 250 to 300 yards. Fire outside this convergent zone was less effective, the bullet streams spreading too widely to concentrate damage. But the P-38's nose-mounted guns fired parallel paths that remained effective at any range from point-blank to 600 yards. During scissors maneuvers, when ranges fluctuated wildly as both aircraft reversed direction, this armament arrangement proved devastating. Maguire developed a specific technique. During each reversal, as his flight path crossed the opponent's nose, he would fire a 1-second burst, even if the deflection angle seemed extreme. The concentrated firepower meant that even partial hits caused significant damage. Japanese pilots reported Lightnings that seemed to score impossible deflection shots during scissors combat, not understanding that the P-38's nose-mounted guns removed the convergence problem that plagued their own wing-mounted weapons. The Japanese response to American scissors tactics evolved throughout 1943, revealing both the maneuver's effectiveness and its limitations. At the 204th Kokutai's headquarters at Rabaul, Commander Masatake Okumiya, one of Japan's most respected fighter tacticians, analyzed combat reports describing P-38 seconds using reversing maneuvers to defeat stern attacks. His tactical directive to squadron commanders acknowledged that American twin-engine fighters possessed unexpected maneuvering capabilities, particularly at medium speeds between 150 and 300 miles per hour. Okumiya recommended several counter-tactics. Japanese pilots should avoid extended scissors engagements, where the P-38's advantages in structural strength and power-to-weight ratio would eventually prevail. Instead, when a lightning-initiated scissors, the Zero pilot should execute a single reversal to assess the situation, then immediately break off, using the Zero's superior sustained turning ability to escape in a different direction. This guidance reflected Japanese recognition that the scissors had neutralized their traditional turning advantage. The P-38 couldn't outturn a Zero in sustained horizontal maneuvering, but the scissors transformed the engagement into something else entirely, a contest of timing and energy management where the Lightning competed effectively. Some Japanese pilots developed effective techniques for defeating the scissors. Warrant Officer Takeo Tanimizu, who would eventually score 32 victories, described in post-war interviews how he learned to recognize when a P-38 pilot was setting up for scissors combat. The American aircraft would deliberately slow down, inviting pursuit, with the pilot constantly checking his 6 o'clock position. Tanimizu developed a counter technique where he would approach at high speed, fire a burst to force the P-38 pilot to commit to a reversal, then immediately break off in a climbing turn before the Lightning could complete its second reversal. But such skilled opponents were increasingly rare as 1943 progressed. Japanese training programs, devastated by attrition and resource shortages, couldn't replace veteran pilots at anywhere near the rate they were being lost. American training programs, by contrast, were producing hundreds of well-trained P-38 pilots every month, each one receiving instruction in scissors tactics before deploying to combat theaters. The tactical innovation that had begun with a handful of pilots experimenting over Port Moresby had become standard doctrine taught at every P-38 training base in the United States. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. At Muroc Army Airfield in California's Mojave Desert, instructors used specially modified P-38 seconds to teach advanced combat maneuvering. Students flew practice scissors against each other, learning to recognize the specific visual cues that indicated optimal timing for each reversal. They practiced deploying combat flaps while maintaining visual contact with an opponent, coordinating throttle, stick, and rudder inputs to achieve the tightest possible turn radius without stalling. And they learned the most critical lesson. The scissors was exhausting, mentally and physically, requiring sustained high-G maneuvering while tracking an opponent's position through rapid direction changes. The physical demands were substantial. Each reversal loaded the pilot to 3 or 4 Gs, pressing him down into his seat with triple or quadruple his normal weight. Hold this for 2 or 3 seconds during the turn, then immediately unload to 0 Gs during the roll reversal, creating a moment of weightlessness, then immediately pull back to 4 Gs in the opposite direction. Repeat this sequence 4 or 5 times during a scissors engagement, all while maintaining precise aircraft control and visual tracking of the opponent, and pilots ended combat missions physically drained. Major Richard Bong, who had scored his first 2 victories using scissors tactics in December 1942, continued developing his technique throughout 1943. General Kenny, recognizing Bong's exceptional abilities, eventually assigned him to a roving commission where he could fly with different squadrons, teaching tactics and leading difficult missions. Bong's approach to the scissors emphasized patience and timing over aggressive maneuvering. He would enter the scissors with minimal initial turn rate, baiting the opponent into thinking he was an easy target, then execute progressively tighter reversals as airspeed bled down, watching for the moment when the Japanese pilot committed too much energy to a firing solution and couldn't reverse quickly enough. By mid-1943, Bong had scored 18 victories, many using scissors tactics combined with the P-38's superior climbing ability. His technique influenced an entire generation of P-38 pilots who studied his combat reports and listened to his tactical briefings. The scissors maneuver, as Bong employed it, wasn't a desperate defensive measure. It was a calculated tactical choice that exploited the P-38's specific advantages while negating the Zero's superiority in sustained turning combat. The statistical evidence of the scissors maneuver's impact appeared in 5th Air Force combat reports throughout 1943. P-38 units reported significantly improved survival rates in close combat compared to the war's first year. The 49th Fighter Group, which had suffered heavy losses flying P-42s during 1942, transitioned to Lightnings and immediately achieved better kill-to-loss ratios despite facing the same Japanese opponents. The 475th Fighter Group, equipped exclusively with P-38 seconds from its formation, posted extraordinary results by the end of 1943. The group had claimed over 260 enemy aircraft destroyed against 37 losses. These numbers reflected more than superior aircraft performance. They demonstrated the tactical advantage gained when pilots understood how to exploit their equipment's specific capabilities. The Scissors maneuver exemplified this principle. It took an aircraft that conventional wisdom said couldn't dogfight and gave pilots a technique that made it competitive in precisely the situations where it should have been most vulnerable. The German Luftwaffe, fighting P-38 seconds in the Mediterranean theatre, encountered similar tactics, but responded differently than the Japanese. German pilots, accustomed to fighting the Messerschmitt Bf 110 Zerstörer in their own formations, understood twin-engine fighters' theoretical limitations, but also recognized when those limitations didn't apply. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commanding Jagdgeschwader 77 inches North Africa, issued tactical guidance acknowledging that P-38 seconds could execute what he called reversing defense maneuvers effectively at medium altitudes. Steinhoff's intelligence section obtained gun camera footage showing Lightnings performing scissors against Bf 109 seconds, and German technical officers analyzed the footage carefully. They identified the combat flap deployment visible as a subtle change in the wing's trailing edge configuration, and calculated that the 35% lift increase gave P-38 seconds a critical advantage during reversal turns. German intelligence reports noted that American pilots typically deployed these flaps during the second or third reversal, suggesting a trained tactical procedure rather than random defensive maneuvering. The Italian Regia Aeronautica's experience with P-38 scissors tactics provided additional confirmation of the maneuver's effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Angelo Tondi, Italy's chief test pilot, evaluated a captured P-38G that had landed by navigation error at Capoterra airfield in Sardinia in June 1943. His technical report described flying mock combat against Italian fighters, specifically testing the scissors maneuver. Tondi confirmed that with combat flaps deployed, the P-38 could sustain scissors combat against the nimble Machi C, 202 Folgore, achieving turning rates that seemed impossible for such a large aircraft. Tondi's report emphasized the technique's demands on pilot skill. The scissors required constant awareness of energy state, precise timing of reversal turns, and smooth coordination of flight controls. Italian pilots who attempted similar maneuvers in their twin-engine Savoia Marchetti fighters found the technique nearly impossible. Their aircraft lacked the P-38's forgiving stall characteristics and powerful control authority. This comparison highlighted a crucial point. The scissors maneuver's effectiveness in the P-38 resulted from the specific combination of design features that Lockheed had incorporated, features that other manufacturers hadn't replicated because they'd been solving different design problems. By late 1943, the scissors maneuver had become so central to P-38 tactics that squadron commanders incorporated it into their standard combat formations. The Finger 4 formation, adopted from German tactics, positioned 4 aircraft in a flexible pattern that allowed mutual support. When one element engaged enemies in scissors combat, the second element would position itself to attack any Japanese fighters that tried to exploit the P-38's commitment to the maneuver. This coordination transformed the scissors from an individual defensive technique into a formation-wide tactical system. Captain Thomas Lanphier, flying with the 339th Fighter Squadron, demonstrated this coordinated approach during the mission that intercepted Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's transport on April 18, 1943. While the primary objective was destroying Yamamoto's bomber, the mission required fighting through Zero escorts that attempted to defend their commander. Lanphier engaged the Zeros using scissors tactics, his wingman covering him while he executed reversals that kept the Japanese fighters occupied long enough for other P-38 seconds to attack the bombers. The mission's success depended on every aspect of P-38 capability: the range to reach Bougainville from Guadalcanal, the speed to intercept the formation, and the tactical flexibility to fight through determined opposition. The Yamamoto mission represented the culmination of 18 months of tactical development. American P-38 pilots had transformed their aircraft from a misunderstood interceptor into a versatile weapon system capable of executing the Pacific War's most demanding missions. The Scissors maneuver was one component of this transformation, but a critical one, because it gave pilots options in situations where doctrine had previously offered none. Caught in close combat with a superior turning fighter, American pilots no longer had to rely solely on speed and power for survival. They had a technique that gave them competitive odds if executed with skill. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was profound and cumulative. Petty Officer First Class Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, one of Japan's highest-scoring aces, engaged P-38 seconds over Rabaul in August 1943, and later described feeling frustrated by his inability to maintain a firing solution. He would achieve a 6 o'clock position at what seemed like ideal range, then watch the P-38 execute a violent reversal that forced him to choose between overshooting or attempting to match the turn at dangerously low airspeed. Either choice gave the American pilot an opportunity to reverse the engagement. This frustration reflected a broader Japanese problem. Their training doctrine, perfected through combat experience in China and refined during the war's first year, emphasized horizontal maneuvering combat, where the Zero's advantages were decisive. But the Scissors maneuver, combined with the P-38's other tactical innovations, had essentially invalidated this doctrine when fighting Lightnings. Japanese pilots still dominated engagements against P-39 seconds and P-40 seconds, still achieved impressive kill ratios against other American fighters. But against P-38 seconds flown by pilots who understood Scissors tactics, Japanese advantages diminished dramatically. At Rabaul's headquarters, Vice Admiral Junichi Kusaka, commanding the 11th Air Fleet, received increasingly pessimistic combat reports during the latter half of 1943. American P-38 formations were appearing in greater numbers, their pilots employing tactics that Japanese squadrons couldn't counter effectively. The statistical trend was unmistakable. Japanese loss rates against Lightnings were climbing, while American loss rates declined. This pattern would continue through 1944 as more P-38 groups deployed to the Pacific and as pilot training standardized the tactical innovations that had emerged from combat experience. The dive flap modification, introduced in late 1943, further enhanced the P-38's Scissors capability. These electrically actuated flaps, deployed from the lower surface of the wing's outer panels, could be extended at speeds up to 400 miles per hour. During Scissors combat, if a Japanese pilot attempted to escape by diving, the P-38 pilot could deploy dive flaps and follow, preventing the buffeting and control stiffening that had previously occurred during high-speed dives. This modification closed one of the few remaining escape options Japanese pilots had when engaged in Scissors combat with Lightnings. The hydraulically boosted ailerons, introduced with the P-38J model in mid-1944, addressed the aircraft's last significant limitation in Scissors: combat the slow initial roll rate. With boosted ailerons, P-38 pilots could achieve 90 degrees of bank in under 1 second, matching or exceeding single-engine fighters' roll performance. This improvement made Scissors reversals more abrupt and unpredictable, further complicating Japanese pilots' attempts to track American flight paths during close combat. Major Thomas Maguire, by December 1944, had scored 38 victories using tactics that heavily emphasized Scissors maneuvering combined with aggressive energy management. His combat technique had evolved beyond the defensive applications that characterized early Scissors employment. Maguire used the Scissors offensively, deliberately engaging Japanese fighters at close range, executing reversals that forced overshoots, then immediately transitioning to pursue fleeing opponents. His approach required exceptional aircraft control and unwavering confidence in the P-38's capabilities. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.